this edition of Unboxing the Birmingham Museum. I'm your host, Caitlin Donnelly, and today I am in the basement of the 1822 John West Hunter House. It's the oldest house in Birmingham, oldest house in Oakland County, and if you were to compose a list of the top 10 oldest buildings in Michigan, or oldest houses, it would be, first off, pretty hard to do, but we would probably be on it, maybe even in the top 5. So super cool. I'll throw in some images of the upstairs of the house. We use it to interpret what life would have been like in the early 1800s through about the mid 1800s. All of the artifacts in the house date from about 1819 to the latest piece dates to 1859. So that's why we kind of interpret it with a range. And we talk about what early Birmingham settlers like John West Hunter's family would have experienced here when they moved here in 1819, and how they would have lived, how their life was the same as ours or even different from ours. And so, if you don't know, the reason why Birmingham is where it is both has everything to do with the War of 1812 and just how little settlement was in the Lower Peninsula at that time. So famously during the War of 1812, Commander Hull turned over the Fort of Detroit to the British without a single shot being fired. And part of his justification was that, he only had so many men in the fort at his disposal. And once those men were gone, there was really nobody in the outlying areas that he could have called upon to come and help defend the fort, because unlike in cities like Boston or places out east where, you did have suburbs, where you did have people who, when called upon, could come out and help defense, Detroit really didn't have that. There was really no settlements in the area to call upon. So Hull was court-martialed for this, but he was let off by the president at the time because he had done a pretty good job during the Revolutionary War, and I guess that counted for something. So after the war, the U.S. government wanted territories like the Michigan Territory settled by Americans and settled quickly, just in case the British came back. And so part of that was a program to sell land to veterans for very, very cheap. And so as you might imagine, young men from out east who may not have been able to inherit the family farm or had a lot of money to buy their own land, were really enticed by this idea, including the 4 men that we call Birmingham's founders. So John West Hunter, Elijah Willits, Benjamin K. Pierce, and John Hamilton. So if you see streets and stuff with those last names on it, that's who they're named after. So we know at least 3 of the founders were kind of in on their land claims together. So within just like 12 hours of each other, John Hamilton, Elijah Willits, and John West Hunter bought their plots of land in what would become Birmingham along what was then called the Saginaw Trail. Now, the Saginaw Trail was the only way to get into the interior of Oakland County in the late 18-teens, 1820s, which meant that anyone going anywhere in Oakland County would have had to travel along the trail. And 2 days' journey away from Detroit, the city of Pontiac was going up. It was being platted out. It was going to be a great big city. Lots of people were going to be flocking to it. And those 3 individuals thought, wait a minute, there's money to be made here, right? So John West Hunter, he was a blacksmith. So if your horse threw a shoe along the trail or your wagon axle broke, he was your guy. And he also rented out a room in his house to travelers traveling along the trail. And he also had a liquor license, because again, it was 2 days' journey along the Saginaw Trail, usually on foot. It was a Native American hunting trail and traveling trail. So we have evidence of it being used 10,000 years ago by the Native Americans that lived in this area. But, they didn't have wagons, they didn't have, draft animals pulling things up and down the trail. They were traveling on foot. So the trail was narrow, it was rutted, it was muddy, and made, some pretty sharp turns that wagons just couldn't make. So a lot of people were traveling the trail on foot. So yeah, after a hard day's traveling, you might want to rest somewhere that's not outside. You might, need something stronger than a glass of water to drink, and, you might have issues with your equipment. Famously, the Saginaw Trail is now known as Woodward Avenue, and one of the most famous roads in the world. Millions of people come in every year to watch the Woodward Dream Cruise. When John West Hunter built this house, it was originally at the intersection of Old Woodward and Maple Road. It's been moved twice in its history. The first time was in 1893. A man named Henry Randall fell in love with the house, but tale as old as time in Birmingham, the person that owned it wanted to tear it down and build a bigger, grander home. So Henry Randall moved just the house itself to a plot of land that he owned on Brown Street. And in 1969, the city came into possession of the Hunter House, and in the early 1970s, moved the house to where it currently sits at Maple and Southfield Roads, kind of that intersection there. So down here we do have things both related to kind of the time period of the house, but also we store a lot of our street signs down here. So I'm standing in front of one in particular, and it's a big one. And it says Woodward Avenue, keep right. It was obviously along the side of the road, really big letters so that everyone could see it. We got another one over there, classic cruisers from one of the Dream Cruises. Really cool. It's really great. It helps kind of tell the story of the Woodward Dream Cruise. When I started here 4 years ago, we had an exhibit on the history of Woodward Avenue, and that was one of the things we had towards the tail end of the exhibit when we were talking about the Woodward Dream Cruise and what it has meant to Birmingham ever since it started. And we also have a couple signs here. This one here says Maple Road, so the street we're on today. And, well, I already mentioned Martha Baldwin once, so let's mention her again. She actually lived down Maple Road, actually a few houses down from where the museum is today. And at the time that she first lived there, it was called Mill Road, because down by Quarton Lake there was a grain mill. So it kind of made sense. The road going to the mill was going to be called Mill Road. But Martha was really big into beautifying what was then the village of Birmingham, and so she planted maple trees all along Mill Road, and eventually the name was changed from Mill to Maple, which, I don't know, I think it sounds a little bit nicer, and I think Martha Baldwin did too. That could have been part of the reason why she did it. She was tired of living on a street with a pretty boring name like Mill, so. And we've got a couple of other smaller Woodward Avenue signs that kind of help us, again, tell the story of a pretty important road in Birmingham. We have evidence of people using it 10,000 years ago. So just think, instead of being stuck in traffic on Woodward Avenue behind like a couple tractor trailers, 9,000 years ago, people were stuck in traffic along the Saginaw Trail behind a couple mastodons. So pretty interesting to think about that, you're just one of many of the millions and millions and millions of people that have walked down that road or driven down it or ridden down it. And it's huge, huge history. So I don't know, I think that's just a really cool thought. And down here we also have a couple older promotional materials from the museum that we are storing. And one of those is a booklet that we published in the 1970s all about the John West Hunter House. In 1976, the American Bicentennial was a really big deal. Communities all around the country, both big and small, were looking at their own local history and starting, historical societies and races to preserve their oldest buildings. And I mean, Birmingham, we were already doing that a couple years beforehand because we like to be trendsetters. But so this book was one of the many things published around the American Bicentennial from Birmingham. And yeah, it's a fun, delightful little book. Talks a lot about both the history of the Hunter House, but also the history of Birmingham as well. And well, we got really, really excited when it came to printing this, and we kind of lost track of how many people were living in Birmingham at the time and might want a book like this, and we overprinted. So we still have a couple boxes at the museum. We were selling it in our bookstore for a little while, or gift shop. Obviously we haven't been open to the public for a couple months, so we haven't, but when we open again, please stop by and I will give you a copy for free, because we still have a lot of these. So every once in a while we do get a really good-hearted person that comes across this in their own personal possessions and wants to know if they can donate it to the museum, if we would like it. And we always thank them very much for thinking of us. Not everyone does, so we really appreciate when people do, but we have a couple boxes, so we are good for the time being on the John W. Hunter House Anniversary Album 1822 to 1972. And one of my favorite parts is there's a bunch of ads in here for stores that don't exist, but I mean, I kind of love old ads. I don't know about you. So another thing that we're doing down here in the basement, aside from just storing things and preserving things down here, is in the next room we do have a little room with paper copies bound of the Birmingham eccentrics. So sometimes you know, even if we have a scanned copy, sometimes the scan doesn't quite pick up all the words. You might have seen old documents online where it's kind of hard to decipher. Seeing it in the actual original form sometimes is a little bit easier to read. So we do have those. And one of our incredible volunteers actually set up a station where we can lay old books out flat and able to photograph and digitize them that way. So I was recently down here digitizing a couple photo albums that we have in our collection from a woman named Martha Durkee Blakesley. And if you follow us on any of our social media platforms, you've probably seen images from her scrapbooks before. I really love them. I find them incredibly charming because at this time, mid to latter 1800s, printing became very, very cheap. And so all these companies were in a race to have their advertising materials be the most colorful, be the most eye-catching, and be the most interesting to look at. Kind of like Super Bowl commercials, you know? No company is buying a Super Bowl commercial and then just putting out a really basic, kind of boring ad. You know, they're gonna do something that will stick in your memory, whether good or bad. You know, maybe it's super annoying, but you're still thinking about it 3 days later, right? So a lot of these advertisements she found interesting, so she clipped them out and put them in her scrapbooks, along with some personal things like her invitation to a ball held at Library Hall as a fundraiser for the Ladies Library Association, and you know, her kids' report cards. So, you know, and it's just, it's a nice little thing to look into the past. So I'll throw up some pictures on this video when I go back into editing for that. And that's it for the basement of the Hunter House. Well, I guess I should mention too, this basement is not historic. It was built when we moved the house here in the 1970s. So if you saw in some of the photos that I showed before, you know, we do have concrete cinder blocks. John West Hunter did not build with those in 1822. So just to kind of clear the air on that, I figured I should mention it. So thank you so much for tuning in this week for unboxing the Birmingham Museum. And join us next week when we will go up into the attic of the Hunter House and take a peek at what's up there. So have a wonderful week. We'll see you next time. Bye.